Commission on Equitable Housing and Development meeting has now commenced. It is January 6th at 4 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and to protect the public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting will be recorded. We ask that you use only the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, in order to comply with the state open meeting laws, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call, not by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. Okay, so I'm going to do roll call. Michael Edmonds.
Present.
Olga Flores.
Present.
Sharia Jimenez.
Present.
Jim Toffel, I'm present. Liz Wilson. Liz is absent. Jay Young.
Here.
Mindy Bernstein. Thought I saw Mindy. Oh, okay. Lori Miservo.
Present.
And Evangelina Paz is absent. Maggie Amato Tejas. Absent. Wendy Asher.
Present.
Marianne Bierling.
I'm here.
Mark Clark. Vicky Casino. Marcos Ismail.
I'm here.
Hey, Marcos. Betty Villegas. Corin Manning.
Present.
And Liz Morales.
Here.
Okay, so we've got 6 present. 4 absent. So if one more is absent, I think we lose quorum. Is that correct? Okay, so if any of you have to drop off, let us know. And if none of the others participate, we will have to bring the meeting to conclusion. And just so everybody knows, I am actually doing this from Mexico. I am calling in on my phone, but the internet has been somewhat sporadic here. So if I drop off, I will do my best to get back on quickly. Okay, so first item on the agenda is the review and adoption of the November 4th and the November 9th meeting minutes. Are there any comments on or any changes to those meeting minutes? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion to approve those meeting minutes?
So moved.
Can we approve them both? Okay, Jay's made a motion. Can we approve them both, or do we have to do separate motions?
Anna, we have the expert here, but I believe you can do them both in one motion.
That's correct. It can be done both at the same time.
Okay. Is there a second?
I second. This is Lori.
Okay, so the Jay Young has made a motion and has been seconded by Lori Miservo to approve the meeting minutes for November 4th and December 9th. Michael Edmonds.
Move. That's
Olga Flores, is that a yes?
Yes, sorry.
Sharia Jimenez,
Yes.
Jim Toffel, yes. Jay Young
yes.
and Lori Miserbo.
Yes.
Okay, the ayes have it. Third agenda item is called the audience. This is a time when any member of the public may address the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated for this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each. Due to open meeting laws, Commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by the public may be considered as an agenda for a future meeting. Is there anybody who would like to speak?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would, but I haven't figured out the hand wave thing yet, so not to be rude.
Okay, Ben, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor.
Thank you,
have 3
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman. Members of the commission, Ben Bueller Garcia, Tucson resident on behalf of the Arizona Multi-Housing Association. There's a lot to unwrap on this subject, and there goes my neighbor. Difficult to do in 3 minutes, but let me just give you some points here. There can be a little argument that Tucson faces an affordable housing crisis, but a mandated source of income ordinance is the wrong solution. The Housing Affordability Strategic Plan itself had some clues. Rental rates have surged, median income has not kept up. This has been compounded by several factors of a hot market. The data shows that in the last 3 years, only approximately 2,700 multi-housing permits have been approved within the city of Tucson. When one considers that some of these recent projects include the Benedictine project, they've got starting average rates of $1,600 a month, and the Flynn downtown with advertised rates of $3,000, it's clear we have a supply side problem. Immigration from investors and homeowners coming from high value markets that are snapping up prices and raising rates to take advantage of our hot housing market have further complicated the issue. A record of inadequate management of the program under previous administrations have led many landlords to opt out of the program over the course of the past several years. These issues include severely delinquent payments and the inspection period for new tenants. Many of our members have a waiting list of pre-qualified tenants ready to move in as soon as the new paint is dry. They are not inclined to wait several weeks for an inspection. We're very concerned about the potential unintended consequences of an ordinance like this. We have a supply side problem. Will future developers choose to avoid building within the city limits in order to avoid this ordinance? In a red hot market like this one, will landlords simply choose to raise their rates just sufficiently to avoid the voucher rates further exacerbating affordability for all Tucsonans? One of the principal motivations behind the accessory dwelling unit ordinance was to increase supply by encouraging mom and pop property owners to add inventory to the market. If they are now compelled to comply with the mountains of HUD paperwork, how likely do you think they are to just forego renting the ADU in the first place? Perhaps the most frustrating thing for our organization has been the lack of outreach and stakeholder engagement with our industry experts in the field. The AMA became aware of the potential ordinance when it first appeared on the mayor and council agenda. Perhaps we'll see specific language tonight, but certainly none has been shared with our organization. There are several suggestions in the HAS plan that are better suited to addressing the real root of this problem. Those initiatives should be pursued instead. More carrot and less stick is likely to bring more landlords back into participation in the program. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ben. Kim Fitch, you have the floor.
Thank you. Sorry, I just got notice of this meeting a short time ago. So I am quite concerned about this. I own Nicolosi & Fitch apartment community, Nicolosi & Fitch property management. I tried to get on this commission, as a matter of fact, but I could not because my house and my main office is outside the city limits. But I do have numerous properties in the city limits. So I agree with everything that Ben said. I'm going to add to that by saying that there are a couple other practical issues that need to be looked at. One is the rent reasonable issue. And when we do the rent reasonableness, that means that, if you have a 2-bedroom, well, first of all, HUD allows rents for a 2-bedroom apartment, say. If it's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath versus a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, HUD will only allow one payment based on the number of bedrooms, not bathrooms. Well, obviously in real life, a 2-bedroom apartment does get more rent than a 1-bathroom apartment. So that needs to be taken into consideration. That has not been looked at. The other situation with rent reasonableness and the per unit, the per bed rule is that we are now having older properties that we are renovating. So we have some older units that are at one rate, and then upgraded and renovated units, same size at a different rate with upgraded appliances and amenities. So those cannot be lumped as one category for rent, in order to determine the rent for that apartment. So that is one thing. Another thing that that has not been brought up is the student properties. How are you going to integrate if you force every rental property to accept Section 8? What about the student properties? Those are the properties, the by the bed properties for one, but also the ones that are just conventional properties, but are really targeted and lived in by mostly Section 8, or excuse me, student residents. So that's something to also consider, that some people may not want to send their children to University of Arizona, as an example, if they know that they're going to be living with people who are on subsidized housing. I personally don't have a problem with subsidized housing. I'm actually on a commission now with the Pima County Affordable Housing Commission. So I do believe that it's important. The waiting list situation is something that needs to be dealt with. And also on when a resident renews or moves out who are Section 8, the damages, we are responsible, and it's impossible to get collected. And I know Liz has brought up before the landlord incentive program, and also the one through the state of Arizona. I've used the one through the state of Arizona. It is extremely onerous, and it takes forever to get your money, and you actually don't get your whole money. So those are just some of my thoughts. I would be happy to put this all in writing and send it to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Take my
Is
hand.
there anyone else who would like to speak?
I'm happy to speak. I didn't raise my hand. I apologize for that. My name is Mark Zimmerman. I'm an attorney with Zona Law. We represent a lot of property owners and managers within the city and within the state. I just briefly got notice of this. I wanted to raise a couple issues as well that Kim touched on, as well as Ben. I mean, first off, from Ben, you guys, there is a supply side issue of housing. I mean, if you doubled the amount of available housing, rents would immediately drop. A lot of the issues that are being discussed would no longer exist. That obviously is not happening. But with the supply side issue, putting additional restrictions on developers, property owners, and managers is not going to solve the issue. Developers, if nothing else, will look to other places to put their money to avoid the additional issues that come with Section 8 and subsidy programs. They're good programs, but they should be voluntary, not mandatory. The other thing that Kim touched on that I want to bring up as well is it's not just simply when the resident is in the unit collecting the rent, that can work well, provided that the rent is timely provided. Obviously, there's inspection requirements that are additional obligations that owners may have not been prepared for. There are additional obligations that they would otherwise not have. But upon move out, you've effectively put a person in a unit that they cannot afford. It's beyond that their regular wages that they're capable of affording. And then when they cause damage to that unit, as Kim mentioned, the chance of ever collecting that is minimal, if not zero. Simply, it's beyond their reach, it's beyond the level. And therefore, you have an owner, the only way to compensate for that, knowing that there's going to be additional damages at the end, is, again, going to push up rents to cover those damages. So it's compounding an issue, and will eventually just push rents higher and higher based on those two factors. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Ballou, and I oversee properties here in Tucson. We're owner managed. Been in this industry here in Tucson for about 30 years. I just want to say that, again, going off piggybacking what Kim has said and Ben and Mark, is that we, on behalf of our residents, want to continue to provide excellent housing and affordable for our residents. And this is about the ownership being able to choose their policies, their procedures in accordance with all, of course, fair housing laws and other city regulations. But we want to make sure that our hand is not forced to do things that we typically have not had to be held to that standard as far as the different income regulations in place. We feel like it will hurt the property management business as a whole, residential management as a whole in Tucson. Businesses, property owners will be forced to leave this market, and you will see deferral, maintenance, deferred capital projects, properties that typically would be able to maintain their properties won't be able to afford it. We just went through a huge crisis with the eviction moratorium that caused harm for a lot of properties in Tucson. So again, we just don't want to be in that situation again, where something is mandated that is forcing our hand to participate in a program that still needs help, that still needs improvements. We have seen improvements made with Liz Morales, and we appreciate that, but we know that the system still needs to be improved upon so that the residents are the winners. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Stacy, is it Stacy or James?
It's actually Ann Diaz. I own Arizona First Realty Management. Stacy and James work for me. I wanted to
go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on everything that they said and mention the fact that as a portfolio, we actually work a lot with Section 8. In fact, one of our managers was the one interviewed on the news repeatedly, to kind of say like, hey, Section 8's getting better. So, we do appreciate everything that they do, but we understand there are some of our owners that just do not want to take it. And I don't really feel like they should be mandated to take it. I think it's up to the individual property and the individual needs of the property, and not every property. As far as the problems that we still do have a lot of administrative problems. And the only reason that I see that they got straightened out during COVID was that they weren't allowing clients to come and see them. So I think they just had a lot more time on their hands. Ever since they've opened it back up to clients, we are right back to it. We have to wait 60 to 90 days sometimes to get payment, lost paperwork, everything that, we had the website was down, the portal was down. I had to close out my year end not knowing what payments were for. And so that's just not good on taxes, money in the bank, but I have no idea who it went to. And you had the portal down for the last 8 days, almost 2 weeks of the end of the month, end of the year. So this is going to be a tax nightmare for me on top of it. So once I close out my month, it's closed. I can't reopen it to put the payment in when you guys decided to open the portal on the 3rd. So there's a lot of issues. And if you're all of a sudden demanding that every single place takes it, it's a job in and of itself. My managers that take it, they should have a degree in Section 8, because it is a job to be able to take Section 8 and to be able to keep payments on time, inspectors, the whole thing. And so to just randomly just say that all of a sudden every apartment complex across Tucson has to take it, your inspectors are going to be running around, because right now it is limited on who takes it. And so they know, who takes it, where they take it. And I'm sorry that people can't find homes, but Section 8 brought that on themselves. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Looks like we have one more person who would like to speak. Laura Villa, you have the floor.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everybody. So I think to piggyback really off of Mr. Garcia, I mean, what is the root cause? We have a lack of inventory. Are we talking about that? Are we looking at incentives? Are we looking at credits, tax credits or otherwise, to JV with some of these operators or developers? I mean, we have a great developer in town, and that's HSL. And, you know, have we looked at doing something like that? I feel like forcing this down everybody's throat is not the proper method. We really need to look at the root cause, and the root cause is lack of inventory. However, there hasn't been any plans to develop any affordable housing or to give any incentives or to JV with ownerships or partner with anybody. I mean, we have a ton of BLM land that we could possibly utilize. I don't know if that's been talked about or discussed. Regentrification. Also, to piggyback off of what Ian was saying, the whole bandwidth for the city to be able to mandate all of us to take Section 8. Who's going to inspect all these places? Who's going to support the lease signings? Who's going to review all the documentation that needs to be supported when we have to send in our renewal increases or our renewal signings on top of the inspections that have to be done, the checks that have to be cut? So what does that look like? I mean, what kind of bandwidth does the city have to handle all that? That just sounds like, to me, more delays. More delays. These owners are not the city's bank, holding on to rents for 4 or 5 months. That's not okay. That's not a good way to do business. So for me, I think we need to be discussing what the root cause is and how do we create a solution there. I think we have a lot of resources. We have a lot of smart people on this call. And we should have a committee of stakeholders to create a solution for our issue of lack of housing, affordable housing, that is. I mean, I'd be happy to be on that committee, but to force Section 8, I don't think that's the solution. I think you're going to create a bigger problem. And that's all I have for you today.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, anybody else who would like to speak? The source of income discrimination discussion is agenda item number 6. I'm going to go ahead and move on to agenda item number 4, which is a update from the clerk's office on our bylaws and subcommittees. Anna, hopefully I pronounced this right, Marafo? How do you pronounce that?
Marufo.
Marufo, okay. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much. Antoinette sent me some questions that she wanted me to address, and I was scheduled to attend this meeting last month, but I had to go to elections training, so I had the office supervisor stand in for me. And you mentioned that she had given you different information that I had initially given you by email, I think it was.
So, and commissioners, absolutely feel free to jump in. The outstanding issues from last month that I brought up with Anna are, one, I'm hearing loud and clear from many commissioners, they want there to be expanded opportunities for ex officio members or members of the public to participate in a meaningful way on the subcommittees. And so I had asked Anna if there is a way to either ask mayor and council to amend the original ordinance or in the creation of the bylaws, is there a way to expand subcommittee membership so that it's not limited to the voting members of the commission? That's what I feel like I've heard from many of you, an interest in that. And so that's one thing I wanted to touch on. The second thing that came up last month, I have always been told on, and my understanding is members of the public can speak, whether it's a full commission or a subcommittee, since they have the same rules, as long as the chair invites them, allows them to speak during regular agenda items, which I would say is how we've been managing the subcommittees to date, where some members of the public can speak during agenda items. And so those were the two main clarifications that I feel like were outstanding from last month. But commissioners, feel free if there are other questions you have. The bylaws, we did touch on last month that the commission needs to create bylaws. And so Anna too, if you have any just overall guidance that can help them. I did get copies of drafts of other bylaws that I can share with commissioners. So those were the main things that we're hoping you can touch on.
Okay, I'll go ahead and address the easy one, which is the one about the public participating in the meetings on any agenda item. I did get confirmation from the city clerk, and the chair can recognize any member of the public on any agenda item. We did look up at the different references, the statutes and the open meeting law. And if it helps the commission make decisions, by all means, anyone in the public can participate in that way and maybe give advice, but it would be up to the chair. So the chair would be the person that would ultimately give them the time, as he was doing, and call to the audience, give them 3 or 5 minutes or however long it takes, and as many people as he wants to call on. So that is a yes on that question. As far as the non-voting members participating in subcommittees and voting, that is a no. It's actually written into the statute, and I have a document here. I'm going to try to share so that share the screen so that everyone can see it. Let's see here. Okay. I'm more familiar with Microsoft Teams, so it's going to take me just a little bit. So can everyone see the document that I pulled up? It's a document that has.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. It's Article 13 in the Tucson Code. And I highlighted that area. Here we go. It's section 10A137, and it goes over the non-voting and the advisory members, and the Housing Commission is allowed up to 9 ex officio / non-voting members. And this is pretty much what they are supposed to do. And I highlighted here in B. Such advisory members shall have the right to be present at all meetings and to take part in the deliberations, but they shall be non-voting and shall not be counted in determining whether a quorum is present. So they don't count, they cannot vote, and they do not count towards quorum. As far as the mayor and council, what they can do in amending the creating ordinance is they can add more members, like they did a few months ago, and I can't remember the exact meeting this happened, but I don't know if you recall that you folks wanted an additional member. So they can amend an ordinance to add members, but to change something like this to allow non-advisory members to vote, that's in the Tucson Code. So that's something that they cannot change.
Anna, if a voting member is not present, can they basically give their voting rights to an ex officio member?
No, they can't. And I forgot that rule, and I know it's reading in the open meeting law, but they don't allow substitutes. If a member is absent, he or she is just counted as absent, but they cannot give their right to vote to an advisory member. And I'll have to I'll look that up because I know that that came up in another commission a few years ago. And I remember I spoke to Suzanne Message, the chief deputy, and she said that was not allowed, but I can't remember where it was written. So I'll have to find the answer, but I do know that they are not allowed to substitutes for voting, allow a non-advisory member to vote. That voting member is just counted as absent.
So then on that one, Anna, you mentioned, so it sounds like the two ways to at least get participation is to have the chair acknowledge members of the public, and ex officio can talk and discuss, they just can't vote. Members of the public can talk, discuss. If the chair recognizes them, they can't vote. And or mayor and council could expand the membership of the main commission.
That is correct.
Okay, and I see, Jim, I'll let you take over, but I do see Marianne has her hand up.
Yep, Marianne. She might have stepped away. She just took her video off. You know, one of the things that, you know, we are down one commission member. It sounds like we might be down a second. We've talked about this a little bit offline. And one of my, I guess, thoughts is that maybe we have a path to becoming a voting member. We could talk about maybe increasing the number of voting members and have a path of becoming a voting member through the ex officio members. I don't know how everybody else feels about that. Marianne, you're back. You want to go ahead and you still have a comment or a question? You're on mute.
Also, just real quick, Anna, your screen is still sharing if you intended to do that.
Yeah, I went ahead and X'd out of that that article, and I wanted to bring up our internal document we have regarding the Housing Commission. It just, can you see my screen here? I have the Housing Commission. It's kind of like an internal program that we have for all the BCCs.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it just has the number of voting members that the mayor and council approve, which is 7. And then the ex officio members, which is 9. And it looks like there's one vacancy for the non-voting member. But if it sounds, you know, as the chair mentioned, it sounds like there's going to be one resignation or one vacancy. So we can certainly, a non-voting member can move up to that spot if he or she is nominated by one of the mayor and council. But they would have to be nominated. We would have to get a final or an approving memo from them.
I think we have 10 voting members, and who was it? Do you guys remember? I'm spacing on who stepped down.
Monica Lane stepped down, so you have the, you know, that is a vacancy, and then Evangelina Paz is his. I don't think she hasn't participated yet, and I don't believe she's taken her oath, so that's a second essentially vacancy.
Okay.
And then the ex officio, that's sort of false that we have an open seat. Betty Vegas is on here. It's for the city of South Tucson, and we haven't gone through the formal process of getting her, but she is participating as an ex officio member.
Okay, so yeah, that's correct. It's 7 from the mayor and council appointees, and then 3 from the director, the Housing and Community Development Director. Let me expand this department, Housing and Community Development Department, it looks like. So.
Okay. Marianne, do you want to try to take another shot?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so, well, I've said before, if people have, significant experience and have been supporters of everything that this commission stands for, and they're on a committee, and they're, dedicating their time to be on that committee and have, experience and insight to offer, they should be able to vote. Now, I was recommended to mayor and council by 2 council members, and didn't get selected for the commission. But I will say my time is really valuable. And so it's great to have a voice, but to be on a committee with people that you're spending your time with and, you know, working through stuff and talking and to not have the vote. I'm not interested in it. It's just because I'm so busy. And I'm an avid supporter of the city of Tucson and the housing division, and, you know, all of the plans they actually do have in place for affordable housing. So that's just my comment. I just feel like it isn't valuable since we are not able to vote. Thank you.
Okay, and you had mentioned that there is a possibility, you know, if there is a vacancy or two, we can certainly pass on that and Marianne's information to the mayor and council. And Marianne, if you don't mind me asking, who were the two award officers that recommended you but did not get selected?
You're on mute, Marianne.
Sorry, Kozacek and the ward person who had to leave due to medical issues, that Karen Ulick.
Oh, okay, so it was Councilmember Durham and now it's Councilmember Dahl. So I can
Durham and Kozacek. But okay. Listen, I'm not trying to get myself on this commission. You know, I'm just saying this is where it's at. And for me, and maybe other people, you know, as well. And so this is just, you know, my voice. I was recommended and wasn't selected. So, I mean, that says something, at least to me, about that. And, you know, pushing ego aside around that issue, I do feel like I have stuff to offer. And so if I'm on a committee, I want to be able to vote. That's the bottom line.
Liz?
My only thoughts on what Marianne shared is I really don't want to downplay the ex officio advisory board member role. Granted, there's not voting rights, but what you share and what you provide to those that can is extremely valuable. So understanding, Marianne, your concerns, I just want all the ex officio members to feel equal opportunity to give input and to feel that their input is valued.
I agree with that. Wendy?
Yeah, I just want to say, as a non-voting member, I have felt like the information that I'm able to bring to the discussion has been valued, and the information I get that I can bring back to the community that I feel like I represent, my clients as an attorney at Southern Arizona Legal Aid and my colleagues at Southern Arizona Legal Aid, I feel is very valuable to me. I feel like I've got more insights into how the city is viewing the housing issues that we have than I would have access to in any other way. So I'm glad to be on the commission. You know, it does not really make a big difference to me whether I have an official voting role or not. I feel like it's a valuable use of my time.
Thank you, Wendy. So, Anne, wasn't it Anna? Was it? If
yes.
you could send the sample bylaws out. If that's something we need to do, let's get those out and let's try to get something put together here in the next couple of months. You know, I think we should continue discussions offline about, well, or maybe I'm just going to put this out to the group. How does everybody feel about the size of the commission, the number of voting members versus ex officio members, and, you know, and how are we going to handle succession over time? Shay?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think that more commissioners is not a problem. I think attendance and meeting quorum is always an issue. So I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. But I also was just wondering how difficult, and if there's people who feel really strongly that they want to have voting rights, I think they should be considered. And we have a lot of people who have shown themselves to be very knowledgeable and have stepped up and are present at every meeting, even though they're not, you know, voting members. So I think those people should be allowed an opportunity to maybe join the commission. But that would be my preference. That seems like the easiest path forward. But the second would be long-term, thinking about how commissions can be more transparent and how we can have more democratic process in general. How difficult is it to change? I mean, we just went through this, right, with the zoning code, but are there enough other commissions that are interested in more inclusivity? I mean, is this something that could be a text amendment at the mayor and council level?
Liz?
You know, I like where the conversation's going as far as thinking through number of commission members and maybe changing the ordinance. Those are all things you all get to think about and provide recommendations. Ultimately, mayor and council establish the numbers. And so to change that, it has to be from mayor and council. And also, you know, so I think a lot of what we're talking about can be put into the bylaws as far as those things that you want to do that is within our ability as a commission, and those things that are outside our authority to provide those recommendations to mayor and council.
Okay, thank you. Just one last kind of, I guess, thought, and maybe what we'll do is, you know, believe it or not, we're coming up on 1 year with this commission. It's probably time we establish another communication with mayor and council on how things are going, and maybe part of that could be the recommended changes we'd like to see to the commission. I think from a subcommittee perspective, having additional voting members would be a good thing, because a lot of our subcommittees, we only have a couple of voting members. And so if one or two of those people aren't present, they can't meet. So from that perspective, we might be able to get more done if we do have additional voting members. Any other comments or thoughts before we move to the next agenda item?
There's one more question that Anne had asked that I was going over this piece of paper, and she had mentioned that if a subcommittee can take a position, does it have to be formally adopted by the whole commission? Is that still in question, Anne? I'm not sure if that got answered.
So that was an example of something that came up last time, that we were saying some of those things could probably be clarified in the bylaws, but since you brought it up, if you do have an answer quickly, that would be helpful.
Okay, yeah, that's an easy answer. Any decisions, agreements, anything that the subcommittee votes on, it has to be approved by the full commission. So, and this is the reason why when a commission does not have a full quorum to meet at all, they don't have enough members to meet, you know, open meeting law won't allow subcommittees to meet also, because everything that they discuss has to be ultimately finalized and voted on by the full commission. So that's pretty much the answer. And like you said, you can put that into the bylaws. And what other, and I'm not sure if this commission is thinking about forming a subcommittee to draft the bylaws, but most BCCs do that. They'll form a subcommittee to draft the bylaws, and then the full commission will approve it once it's drafted.
Thank you. And Anna, thank you for being here. Thank you for sending me the examples. And I promise, Jim, I'll send them out to the whole commission.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay.
Okay. Our next agenda item is agenda item number 5, ARPA partner funding. And Anne, I think you're going to kick this off, and then Johanna Hernandez is going to be able to answer questions.
Yeah, and I'll say, Liz Morales, feel free to also jump in here. So as soon as the city of Tucson released the application for partner funding for the American Rescue Plan, state and local fiscal recovery funding. Yes, that's a mouthful. In our department, we've been referring to it as SLRFI. So when the application was released for the partner SLRFI funding, understandably, a few of you asked some questions since there is a fair bit of money for housing. And I believe it was Mike Edmonds. Thank you for the suggestion that we agendize this. I invited Johanna Hernandez. She is the Deputy Director of the Business Services Department. They're overseeing the process. And so if there are questions related to the process, I figured Johanna will be the best source to answer them. What I'm going to do is share my screen. I feel like the website that Johanna and the team working on this put together is the best resource to provide just an overall overview of what is available in the process. And so I'll go through that really quickly and then see if people have some questions. And as I'm doing that, Johanna's putting some links in the chat that would be helpful. And I invite both, Liz, Johanna, feel free to jump in as some of this is not the areas that I've been working in. But there is a really informative website. It talks about the American Rescue Plan and what the city is looking to do with the funding. And it starts off talking about COVID resources in general. Throughout the website, there are different places to click to actually apply for the funding, as that's the main, most important aspect of the partner funding is making sure people know how to potentially apply for it. There have been a few workshops and there are office hours where questions can be answered. And so on the website, there is more information about what the American Rescue Plan is and what the city's allocation is and what the categories that mayor and council allocated the funding in. And then there's a really good description of there's city managed projects and there's community grants projects. So today we're talking about the community grant projects. So there's $34 million over 4 years. And I'll say really grateful in terms of the amount of that pot that is going to categories that are related to housing. And so a lot of information, including the link. And so in terms of the community grant program, it lays out the categories of funding. And as it talks about, the mayor and council identified 7 categories for the SLRFI funding, 5 of them for community partnerships. So the 5 categories: relief for families, essential and frontline workers, and small businesses, community reinvestment and recovery, workforce and youth development, promoting affordable and stable housing. I guess I missed small business being a separate. So of those 5 categories, just wanted to make sure the commission is aware of the ones that are really integral in terms of housing. And actually, I'm going to come up here and start here. Under the relief for families, frontline workers, and small businesses, there is a category called energy retrofits for homes and businesses. And so that category, there's 500,000 for this first year, is to find partners to develop and implement a program to use grant funds to provide financial support for energy retrofit programs for homes and businesses. So that's one. And then jumping down to promoting affordable and stable housing, there is a housing cooperative development fund. There is a category for small scale senior and youth housing. There is one for a housing resource connection program and wraparound services, and one for manufactured housing rehabilitation replacement. Again, all over there is links to the application and talks about one of the key parts of the application is really looking at equity and making sure the projects that are proposed and selected advance the city's priority towards advancing racial and social equity. And so more on the timeline and a glossary. One of the things I will say is there is intentionally not very detailed information about each of the categories, because mayor and council have indicated they're really interested in innovative proposals and don't want to limit things at this point too much. Yes, all of it will have to comply with the federal rules, but really part of this is to hear what community members propose as the things that they think need the most funding. And so with that, Liz, Johanna, anything to add before we take questions?
Just add that we do have can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. We do have a relatively significant amount of dollars in the community housing program, but as you guys may be aware, those aren't the only housing dollars for ARPA, right? There's a whole chunk of dollars that are city managed that are part of the city's allocation, and there's a whole chunk of money that housing got outside of the city's allocation. So this is just one piece of all of the federal funding that we're getting from ARPA for this.
Thank you. And so, and I'd say, Jim, if folks have questions.
I'll start. I've got one question, one comment. So in terms of the weatherization item that you were looking at, that there's a company up in Phoenix that's been doing that for a long time across the state, Foundation for Senior Living. They're a nonprofit. They have an arm, and that might be somebody that you guys might want to talk to in terms of understanding how they manage the weatherization for for distressed homes. I guess the question I have is from a timing perspective. I thought I saw something saying December 31st, 2024. Is that when the money needs to be spent, or is that when it needs to be committed?
So the first tranche of money needs to be spent by then. We have technically already committed these dollars by approving a strategic plan and allocating them to the different components of the plan. So we've technically met our obligation to commit these dollars. And then the first tranche needs to be spent by 2024. We'll get a second tranche next year. That goes through 2025 to 2026.
Okay, so if we're looking at the LIHTC program, that would coincide with the 2022 applications, which have to be placed in service by 2024.
Yes. Now, I mean, so we have the partnership program, right? They apply for a grant, they get funded a grant. That counts for our obligation to spend those dollars, right? Now, they may have a program that's going to last longer, but our obligation to spend those dollars is fulfilled. So even if it's not fulfilled by even if they're not done with their program by 2024, our obligation to spend is done.
And I was just going to say, Jim, FSL is working with us on our other rehab program. So we definitely want to get this information out to all of those who help us with that program.
Well, this is exciting. Any other questions or comments? I did notice there was $100 million set aside for City of Tucson, and one of the priorities there was also affordable housing. So that's, I'm assuming that's what you guys are thinking you're going to be using for your in-house projects, correct?
Yes, so these are called the partner grants, and then there's funding that's directly to the department. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you, Johanna. Appreciate that update. Laura, you have a question?
I think I just have a comment, just going back to the whole mandating the Section 8. I don't even think that's going to open up more housing. I mean, the way the market is currently, we are highly occupied. We are highly leased.
Laura?
Yes.
That's a different agenda item. We're not talking about agenda item number 6. We're talking about the American Rescue Plan funding.
Okay. So I'll wait for number 6. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or comments on the ARPA funding? Okay, agenda item number 6, source of income discrimination. So Liz, you have a presentation on this, is that correct?
Yes, I do. All righty. So first of all, Happy New Year to everyone. I know that this ordinance that Mayor and Council asked us to work on is very controversial. I highly respect our partner organizations like the AMA, Tucson Association of Realtors, have had initial conversations. Won't be the first or the last, but understanding everyone's concerns. I think even though we might disagree on some things, I think there's more agreement than disagreement on what the issues are, what things need to be worked on. So hopefully the presentation addresses some of those things. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Let me see. Let me see where I'm at. Where did I fall? I had it here. It's my bar is covering it up. Hold on. There it is. So my voice is a little bit strange in the sense of I just am recovering from something and it seems to have impacted my voice. So I might get a little bit out of breath. I don't see it. You guys don't see it either, right? Okay. I imagine you see that.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Thanks for your patience with me. All righty. All right. So I just want to talk about some of the things that have already been worked on and put in place because of the issues that we've been dealing with on the Section 8 program, on our other subsidy programs that work with veterans and homelessness. These are things we've been working on since I've gotten here, understanding that we need to use as much tools available to us to incentivize and bring landlords to us. And one of the things I want to say through our housing affordability strategy for Tucson plan was something that was just adopted. It covers 10 policy initiatives. So please know that this ordinance conversation is only one of many, many, many actionable items that we're taking. We don't think this is the magic bullet, but we do think it's something worth looking and exploring and with the purpose of adopting so that we can have one more tool in our toolbox. Talking about lack of housing options. Yes, it is a supply issue. Yes, building permits have been extremely low on the multi-housing side. Those are all things, including working with our own planning and zoning department who have a lot of challenges with capacity and trying to work. They work harder, I think, than anybody else in the city because they're trying to process so many permits. But here's the reality on our side when we're working with our Section 8 program. We currently pay every month 1,820 landlords, of which 306 have indicated a willingness to continue to work with Section 8. That's about 16% of those 1,800 landlords. 164 have a cap of how many units they will give to Section 8. So most of them use 6% of their units towards this program. And what we found that of the 164 at capacity, only 142 are currently accepting Section 8 if and when a unit becomes available. As an example, this number can vary from month to month, but it's not too far. Every month, we have about 366 voucher holders. So what we're finding is that they are averaging anywhere between about 60 to 70 days to find a unit. Our homeless population, because they're harder to serve, they're around 80 days. So it's extremely difficult for anyone to find a unit. Currently, we have a human service ordinance that covers mirrors, the Federal Fair Housing Act, but has additional things like, so it covers race, color, religion, ancestry, sex, age, disability, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, familial status, or marital status. So it applies to both public accommodations, employment, and housing. So this is where we would see the source of income. I think the issue with source of income, let me get into the next one. What is source of income discrimination? And it refers to the practice of refusing to rent to that housing applicant solely because of their form of income. We're looking at this definition. Again, it can change, but source of income means all lawful sources of income or rental assistance, program, homeless assistance, security deposit assistance, or housing subsidy program, included but not limited to the Section 8 housing voucher program. I think it's important to understand that what we're saying is a landlord can do all their screening process, and should a person meet all their screening processes, that if the only thing that's standing in the way is that they have a voucher or some other form of rental assistance, that they should not be denied. Sorry. So I want to share, and I think what's covered here is some of what has already been stated, but I want to acknowledge that we're listening, that we understand the PHA performance around our past issues with payment, length of time of inspections to be completed. That's not to be understated. In fact, when I went before mayor and council last month, that was the central theme. All mayor and council and Councilmember Kozaczek, who led this item, really put me on the spot, and it was duly needed to say, how are you going to improve the program? How are you going to address these concerns? So please know that we have already made significant improvements, but we're not done. And before an ordinance goes into place like this, we would have to seriously increase capacity and ensure we have the proper resources and staffing to address having an ordinance like this in place. The other concern is around perception that Section 8 tenants are more problematic and causes damages to units and unpaid rent. I will say, I get a little bit, what's the right word? Defensive, talking about Section 8 participants, because there's so much stigma around it. And granted, we have tenants that have lived up to those negative perceptions, but I think they are the minority. And we know in the rental industry, it's a tough industry. It's extremely hard, and so we definitely work with landlords to help address those issues. But it is something that, again, whether it's perception or reality, it is a concern. That this can be a disincentive and could result with owners selling units or developers refusing to build more units in Tucson. And it could result in landlords raising rents. I will say that could be true, but I will say that we have not had this ordinance in place, and what we've seen in rising rents over the last 2 years is so significant that it's pricing out not just Section 8, but everyone that's at the lower income scale. And that it removes ownership control. That, and I've heard, pushing this on landlords, requiring landlords. We have other mandates, like the Federal Fair Housing Act, that does provide mandates of what they can or cannot do related to discrimination. And ownership will still retain ownership control as far as screening and doing those things. So this is just one item that would be added to that. So next steps, as you know, the mayor and council voted to advance this protection as of December 2021. We're going to be working interdepartmental with our city attorneys to draft the ordinance language, discuss what resources are needed, reporting, and other issues that arise. Once we draft the ordinance, we want to roll that out with the community stakeholders. We want a lot of input before we take it to mayor and council to make sure that we are working together. And finally, the recommendation today is to move forward with drafting it and to work with our industry organizations and to work through those concerns and most importantly, to improve the programs overall. So I'm going to stop sharing and allow for questions.
Okay, who on the commission would like to speak first?
And I will say, it doesn't need to be questions if anyone has comments about their thoughts on this.
Jay?
Yeah, I would just say that I heard the public comment. I know that this seems to be another hot topic, kind of triggering issue. The way I understood this ordinance is exactly how Liz just presented it. It seems to me very much not a very high impact item. I mean, honestly, to me, it just seems like one more. The way that I interpret this is that basically a landlord can go about their business as they normally have and would. They screen people as they normally would. But if it comes down to rejecting someone, even though and that's where I agree with the ordinance, because a person should not be rejected, even as long as they meet the landlord's requirements or, the property manager, whoever it is, they shouldn't be rejected just because they have a Section 8 voucher and they're not coming with cash. So to me, it's a very nuanced kind of, I don't see this in any way as forcing anyone to participate in the program. That's not what this is. That would be illegal. I feel like what this is, it comes down to this very small nuance of once a person has, again, been screened and they meet all the qualifications that the landlord is still in control of, that at the end that they won't be denied because of this, because they have a Section 8 voucher. So again, I don't see it as, but if a landlord, it's their policy that they don't want to accept Section 8, I don't think they would still be allowed to do that, right? I mean, I guess I need more clarity on that.
So under the ordinance, they could not deny a person solely on their voucher. So in a sense, it is mandating that they work with the program.
Is the public allowed to comment? I see a lot of questions from the public as well as Betty.
I'm gonna focus on the commission members first and see how we're doing on time. Wendy, you're on mute. So I don't know if you're
Yeah,
ready to speak.
so yes, I am. So I think we need to look at this exactly the way that Liz has described it, which is that denying somebody the right to rent a unit based on their source of income for paying for that rent is discrimination. And you can't discriminate based on race, age, gender, et cetera, in the city of Tucson, many of those categories in the country nationwide because of fair housing concerns. And if somebody can come up with the money, no matter what the source of it is, they cannot be denied housing. And I think that that is a huge issue. As a housing attorney in Tucson, representing tenants, I have had a heartbreaking number of people who have vouchers and can't find housing, even though with the voucher, they could afford the rent. And the only reason they're being turned away is that the landlord is saying, I don't want to accept Section 8. Now, clearly on the other side of it, and Liz, I hope you don't get too defensive, is that Section 8 really needs to step up and be more efficient so that those arguments that the public provided earlier in our conversations about the cumbersomeness and the bureaucracy and the delays in payment, et cetera, Section 8 needs to work on that, because those arguments will be there, and there shouldn't, everything that's possible should be done to make that argument baseless. Thanks.
Jay?
Yeah, I agree. I think Shay really captured my sentiments as well, as did Wendy. The other thing that I want to mention is, nobody wants to make it more difficult for people to rent by enacting policies that are going to further raise rent or do any of the things that I think were mentioned. But for me, as a commission member and thinking about making recommendations to mayor and council, one of the things that I think the evidence shows is that you can use Section 8 in fewer and fewer places because landlords are literally saying from the front end, we're not accepting Section 8. So that's clear. We know that that's happening. However, I don't see any evidence or haven't been presented any evidence that the kind of sky is falling mentality that if you put this into place, that rents are going to go up, that landlords are going to sell their properties. I mean, if that's the case, let's see some evidence of it. But, just saying that it may happen without any real evidence, I think is problematic for me. So, if there is evidence of that out there, let's put that on the table. But we do know that Section 8, people with Section 8 vouchers or, veterans benefits or SSI or whatever are being denied housing simply because of their source of income. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Betty Villegas.
I just want to thank Liz and the city for stepping up and really bringing this to light. As the executive director for the South Tucson Housing Authority, we have 132 vouchers available, but we only have 72 vouchers active right now because we just don't have enough landlords willing to take vouchers. And so while I'm in a 1.2 square mile area and it's a high rental area, but we're still seeing landlords here that are raising their rents significantly and making it even harder for those that don't have Section 8 vouchers to live here in South Tucson. So it's a problem. And I know because I'm a property manager and I have to deal with tenants as well. It's not easy. And we do have tenants that have issues that we have to address. But as landlords, we address them, whether we have to go to the extreme or whether we try to educate our tenants, whether we give them the resources that they need if they're not making the choices that we want them to make in our units. So there is a way to mitigate some of these with the proper case management, the social work, and education. Home buyer education is important, so is rental education. And I think those are things that Liz, I'm sure, in the city will address as they form and create this policy. So we should give it a chance. Landlords have you're in charge. If that tenant that is a Section 8 holder, if you're made to accept them and they're not following your rules, you have the option of evicting them. So it's not like you're tied to this person for a year, even if they're not following the rules. And then it's up to the housing authorities or whoever's managing the Section 8 vouchers to really try to work with landlords on trying to mitigate some of these issues that happen with tenants, because not all of them are bad. Some of them are just going through bad times, and we have to understand that. So that's, at this point, that's all I have to say. And I do have to run, unfortunately, but thank you again.
Thank you, Betty. Mary Ann Beerling.
Okay, so just a couple comments. I really don't know where I stand on what anyone is saying. I think Liz did do a good presentation, and it makes clear a lot of things that haven't been made clear, media wise. But people with no income and who are on what we consider housing assistance programs, of which Section 8 is one, and a lot of landlords or property management companies don't technically look at that as income, even though we do have to do the ticks based on all of that. It's a housing assistance. Some landlords have in place that you have to have 2.5 times the rent and income to be considered to move in. And housing assistance that just pays the rent isn't going to do that. But a bigger issue is we work with poor people, and we work with people who are on vouchers of all kinds and they have no income. And so food is an issue for them. Taking care of any medical needs is an issue. Buying furniture is an issue. Getting their own renter's insurance is an issue if that's something that a landlord, wants in place. Taking care of their kids is an issue. And when you're an affordable housing provider, that as that affordable housing provider, you're going to have some kind of program to help families stabilize while they're getting this assistance with the rent. So there's an issue here, I think, that needs to be discussed that hasn't been, is with zero income or really, really low income households, because they can't meet other needs, and market rate landlords aren't going to help them do that. And that is going to be apparent in market rate communities, who's able to make it and who isn't. So that's just one thing. And if we're talking about discrimination, I think that we have to be aware of this fact and the extra work involved in owning properties where people with zero income who are getting assistance need other things in their life. So that is one thing that we need to think about. The other thing is that damages in general. So any tenant that causes damages while they're living in the property, they can be charged for the repairs if it's caused by them and it's consistent. If they don't have the income, they can't pay for those repairs. And so the landlord is having to do that, which means that if you're not like a nonprofit or can raise money to subsidize that kind of stuff, it does affect the bottom line. And a lot of market rate and higher end landlords have no intention and had no intention when they develop their properties to deal with this stuff. They don't want to. So these are just other extra things, you know, to think about. And, you know, we manage apartments that people who have no incomes are subsidized by a myriad of vouchers, not just Section 8, and they live in squalor. And that is a sin, okay, in my mind, you know. So of course we're out trying to change that, but typical market rate landlords aren't going to do that, you guys. And so how does that change? That's just my big question around all of this. And, you know, kudos to the city for bringing this up and really taking a look at this. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann. So I'm going to recognize myself and just kind of share my thoughts. So last month when this came up, it was the first I had heard of it. I wasn't aware of the issue prior to that. I talked with Jay Young after the meeting to understand his perspective. I've also talked with both Liz and Ann this last month, and I've called some other developers and market rate owners to understand their perspective, because I want to try to understand all the sides of this issue. It's a very complicated issue. I think in a lot of ways this is a sticky bear, and it's not. I don't think, my gut feeling is it's not something that's going to get resolved here quickly. A couple of the speakers said we have a supply issue, and that is true. Tucson has done very well through the pandemic. A lot of people have moved to Tucson, and it has created a lot of housing issues, both for rentals and for sale. There was a publication that came out recently. It listed Tucson as the #5 top location to develop multifamily apartments in the nation. Tucson, which is a city of 1 million people, it blows me away. Phoenix was #1. So there's a huge demand for new apartments in Tucson. I personally get calls just about every week from national developers who are trying to build here. So there's a lot of people who are working on the supply side and trying to get more supply. And ultimately that is the best case result. But the problem, my understanding of the problem is it's a fairly complicated problem. And the biggest issue is that the HUD rents for Section 8 haven't kept up with the market. Market rents are going up faster than the Section 8 rents. And so there's a lot of communities, especially a lot of the new communities, that, you know, people still couldn't qualify, even if this passes. And so there's a question on, is this really going to make a difference? If this legislation gets passed, will it solve the problem? And it reminds me a little bit of something that happened a few years back, it's maybe 10 years back, in Santa Fe. They had a huge housing issue there, and they didn't have enough affordable housing. So the mayor and council passed some legislation saying that every new development needed to have a portion of the housing set aside for affordable housing. And guess what happened? There's nothing penciled out. And so nothing ended up getting built, or fewer projects ended up getting built. And it created an even bigger gap, a bigger housing gap. And so there is a part of me that is worried about unintended consequences. I think the HAST plan is a good plan. And the ultimate scenario, best case scenario, is for us to do more supply. And I think that the city and the housing department is very focused on that. And that is the best solution to this problem. I always thought the problem was that there were not enough housing vouchers, not that people who had housing vouchers couldn't find housing. Now, obviously, we do have a problem, and all the writing is on the wall that the problem is getting worse. So we need to do something, but if this legislation or if this ordinance passes the way it is and it doesn't solve the problem, what's next? What's going to happen after that? And I I get worried about, you know, if you know, you kind of continue to take this to the next level, it will eventually affect, you know, it will make development more difficult. And I'd like to see natural market forces work and us just be really successful in getting a lot of new projects into Tucson, and a lot of new affordable housing projects into Tucson, which I think we're going to do. And if we do that, that's going to be the best way of fixing this long term. But it's a long-term solution, not a short-term fix. Lori, you want to go next?
Sure. Maybe what I have to say is going to sound really simplistic after that. And I think everybody has some really good points, but I think, you know, that obviously we all know that being low income and being homeless is an extremely complex problem that you can't solve with just one thing, and that it takes all of us, from landlords to social service agencies and the city of Tucson and the county. But I think what's so frustrating as a social services provider is how hard we work to get money into our community at the city, state, county, federal level to provide people with housing. And then we run up against the kind of idea that not everybody deserves housing. And that's just unacceptable to me. You know, we're saying that we don't want you to live here. It's the not in my backyard, right? And that's not how a healthy community functions. And we can't just keep saying to people that are less than that we don't want you. And that's really where we're at, because you're talking about housing vouchers, but I work for an agency that has millions of dollars of federal funding that we're having just as many challenges as you all are having with vouchers, as the city is having with vouchers, getting people housed. And it just keeps getting harder. I've worked at my agency for many years, and it just keeps getting harder. So it's a complex solution that requires everybody come to the table. And unfortunately, money is always involved, and it's super frustrating because those that have don't want to give up what they have. And those that don't have can't ever get ahead if folks are not willing to help them. So again, it might be too simplistic, but coming from a social worker, I just thought it was important to say.
Shay?
Thank you, Lori. That's really awesome, and everyone else for their comments. I think it is really complex. I'm also a landlord, and I'm a small landlord. I just have one property. It's only one rental. So I guess for me, I am always wondering about, I guess here's why I thought that the landlord was in control, because they still have to income qualify, correct? So say you're a landlord and you have the rent set at $1,200 a month for a 3-bedroom or whatever. If that tenant comes to you with their application and they don't, Section 8 or not, they don't meet that income qualification, they're not going to get approved, right? And
that's correct. They have, yeah.
Sorry, Liz.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say the section, it has program standards, payment standards. And if the rent is higher than those standards, then the tenant would not qualify.
Exactly. So that's why, again, I just feel that this absolutely still places the power ultimately in the hands of the landlord, which it always has been, historically always has been. And so I feel like this is a very minor requirement. The people who I think would be affected the most in a negative way, it's not going to be the big landlords. I'm sorry, it's not going to me, in my opinion, it's like if you're running a professional real estate management company and you have hundreds, maybe even thousands of units in your portfolio, like you have some capacity to handle the paperwork, you have some capacity, you have staff, right? Like you're doing this at a professional level. It's very different. The people who I think it might potentially harm the most, and the people who I'm always concerned about, are the mom and pops, right? The small landlords, people who are only who don't have staff, who don't have any administration, who are going to have to, again, take on a burden that that they may or may not have the capacity to deal with. So again, I think there's very different scales. I think that all those stakeholders should be involved in the next steps, and those very different spectrum of landlords should be represented in the conversation to really go through the scenarios and walk through the steps of accepting an application, going through the process, and make sure that all the kinks are worked out and that all the issues, are discussed before any kind of ordinance gets passed. Because you do really need to look at it both as a scale issue, but from my perspective, as long as landlords are able to control what the rents are, they ultimately have the power to, again, say who comes and who qualifies and who doesn't. And as everyone is saying, those higher luxury apartments, they're never going to accept Section 8. I mean, they're just not, the tenants are never going to qualify. So, and that tends to be the problem with brand new housing, is that because of the cost of construction right now, I mean, the rents are always high. So really, again, the people who are on the ground providing affordable housing tends to be the small mom and pop landlords, because they have older housing stock. They maybe have already paid off the mortgages. There's ways, that group of folks is really important. To me, they're the ones responsible for the NOAAs, the naturally occurring affordable housing. And I think we need to make sure that that group of folks, is also really involved in this discussion.
I would just add, Shay, that,
Liz?
right, I'm sorry. Yeah, yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
You're
Yeah.
right. Right now, I feel like our strength is our mom and pops. And we do a lot of hand holding, and we do a landlord orientation. So, they are, if they come to us not knowing, we make sure that they're very, very much supported. The only other thing I was going to mention that I forgot to mention in the presentation is, the city of Tucson is not taken being a front runner or trailblazer on this issue. There's over 20 states and 110 communities that have this in place. And so, we are just following the lead on some of this that's already been done.
Jay?
Yeah, I just reflecting on what everybody has talked about. What occurs to me is that this is actually simple. What we're talking about is actually very simple. Source of income protection, affordable housing in general, the housing crisis that we're experiencing, that is complex. But, from a fair housing perspective, nothing really changes aside from the fact that you just simply cannot deny somebody simply because of source of income. It's the same thing as saying, all things being equal, I'm going to deny you just because you're Black, or just because you have children, or just because you're a woman. It's the same type of thing. All else is equal. If you can afford the unit, if you can, meet all of the other obligations, then, you can rent, but nothing else really changes. This just says you can't have a blanket ban basically on people who have some sort of voucher. So I think it is actually relatively simple. I think we're making it much more complicated and adding in many more things that aren't actually a part of this ordinance. And Liz, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is relatively simple. We're just making it a lot more complex than it actually is.
I just think.
Jay, I guess, the question that I have when I was looking at this is this ordinance going to solve the problem? Because I don't know that I don't know that we want to give it the teeth, but I don't think it's going to have the teeth to basically push landlords to where they have to start accepting people with vouchers. I mean, one of the issues right now in the city of Tucson is there's a housing shortage. The rental units are at 97% capacity, which is basically means everything's full because it takes time to turn units. So, if we take somebody with a housing voucher in a unit instead of somebody who's willing to pay the market rate rent, what that's going to do is it's going to put, somebody else on the street looking for a rental unit. So ultimately this is
But you can do that, Jim. I mean, if you have 10 applicants, one of them has a Section 8 voucher and all of the other 9 qualify for the unit, you can pick out of any of those 10 people. So, you know, you don't have to take a voucher.
So what's this ordinance
land-
gonna do?
I would say that landlords that have a blanket ban on Section 8 voucher holders, it is a barrier that is unnecessary. And I think that we need to do everything we can to remove any barriers that prohibit people from freely accessing the housing market. And that's what landlords, and particularly big landlords, that say, don't even apply here if you have a Section 8 voucher. That is a barrier. And I think that we as a commission and we as a community have the obligation to remove any and all barriers to housing that are presented to people. And this is a barrier. So I understand what you're saying. How much of an impact is it really going to have? You know, that's open for debate. We can look 5 years down the road, but I don't think that it's going to cause all of the harms that people are talking about. There's no evidence of that. And it will definitely remove a barrier that we are seeing in the community that is being put in place for people who are low income that have vouchers. So we should remove this barrier because it is a barrier, and because the things that we're talking about happening, there is no evidence that is going to prevent people from building housing in Tucson or that rents are going to go up. There just isn't evidence for that. So, and as Liz said, it's happened in many other places. And if there's evidence that, you know, it's caused a catastrophe in terms of, you know, new housing getting built or, you know, people becoming homeless, then let's see that evidence. But I can pretty much tell you, you're not going to find it because I don't think it's out there. So I think we need to remove this barrier because it is a barrier.
Maggie?
Hi, everyone. Just really quick, Liz, can you just tell us what the Section 8 process is, both to become a landlord and also, like, what is that whole process? What is it that everyone's afraid of, I guess?
So we do have a nice thick packet of paperwork that needs to be completed. Once that's submitted, we do what's, I think Kim mentioned, the rent reasonableness process. What we need to show is that that landlord's not charging more rent than for a non-assisted person, and that it also meets the market area. Once the rent reasonableness is completed, which usually happens within 24 hours to 48 hours of receiving that, then it gets scheduled for an inspection. Our inspections used to take a long time. We're finding now we can schedule them under 5 days, but the problem is today is that because of what the units that people are finding, those units aren't ready for another 30 to 60 days until that unit is vacant and turned. So we tend to be waiting on the landlord more than what the landlord is waiting for us. And then once the unit passes, the tenant can move in immediately. The payment starts officially on the day that after the inspection happens. But before we can actually issue payment, we have to have the landlord, we execute a contract with the landlord. And so we'll send the document to the landlord. And once that's returned, right now we're averaging between 30 to 40 days for that to get executed and paid out. So that's the latest number I just pulled as of last month. And so, and we have a lot of, so once that's executed, payment is given. So the first initial payment does take a little longer, but once that initial payment is done, it's automatic from that point forward at the start of the month. And so once, so that again, landlords have been saying that that's, once they get that, they never have an issue with payments from going forward. But it really is incumbent on both our office and the landlord to get that contract executed sooner than later.
Mike Edmonds?
Well, just really quick. So are landlords able to then, so if the city doesn't pay in a timely manner, do they have to pay the late fees and all of this stuff? Or is it something that they kind of agree not to?
So there's no late fees because we're paying from the date after it passes inspections. So unless there's a reason, in the contract, it says if it's at the fault of the PHA. So the contract actually shows that we have up to 60 days to make that first payment from contract execution. So if we exceed that 60 days, the landlord can ask for those late fees from us, and we've paid that in the past. But typically we're doing it under the 60 days, so there shouldn't be any late fees.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Maggie? You good? Mike Edmonds.
Thank you.
Okay, hopefully this will be kind of quick. Jim, you made the comment where you said that you had concern about it not solving the problem, and I get that. But that just sparked something in my mind that, okay, but we need to start heading towards some solutions. So this doesn't have to solve the problem, but it can be a solution. So I'm starting to lean heavily towards it. If somebody's got a better solution, whether you're a landlord or whatever, bring it. Until then, we need some bullets in the gun, and I'm ready to load this one up.
Jay, did you have another comment?
No.
Okay, so I guess a quick question to the other commission members. Do you guys want me to do another quick call to the audience? We're at 5:43. We got about 15 more minutes to get through the last 3 agenda items. Okay, I'll make the decision. Let's make it quick. So Kim, if you could do 2 minutes.
Thank you. There are a couple of things that were said. First of all, not all landlords think that Section 8 residents are terrible. That is actually not the problem. The problem are the administrative issues. And I understand what Liz said about the rents getting paid. You know, it does take a long time to get the first one, but then you get on schedule. But then you run into the same roadblocks upon renewal. And getting renewals has been a huge nightmare. And that is a continuing problem. Occupancy is, as you said, very high. And so stating that the landlords are the problems with not being ready, it's because we're pre-leasing apartments. As soon as we get a notice to vacate, we're pre-leasing them. And to counter something that Jay said, we do not get hordes of applicants and put them on one apartment and wait to see who's the best one to float to the top. We take the first person who applies for that apartment, gets applied to that apartment, and they own that apartment until they are approved or denied and move in. It is not that we then say, oh, that person was Section 8, we're going to bump them and allow another person to take their place who is market rent person. Nothing was addressed about the issue of, I understand rent reasonableness. Nothing was addressed about if it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath or renovated versus unrenovated, or if it's a student property with rent by the bed. I don't know how you incorporate a vouchered person in that situation. And I've worked with Mary Ann Berling in the past, and I fully understand that zero income residents have huge amounts of issues that big companies do not have the staff to man and take care of this, just like a full classroom teacher does not have room for one child who has special needs to give them the attention they need to help the situation. So to put it all on the landlords and to think that because we have multiple units that we're some kind of high and mighty in making all these choices. We're trying to do the best job that we can for our resident profile and make sure that we do the best job we can for our ownership. And it's a very strong market right now. You know, when things were bad, everybody struggled. But you know what? It's a strong market and we have to do our job and take advantage of it. And I'm willing to serve on any committee to help try to solve the homeless problem and the voucher situation without putting it on private owners' backs. Thank you very much.
Hey, I just
Thank you, Kim.
Kim, if we can on those issues, I didn't want to get too deep in the
Sure.
details. When we meet, like with the AMA, let's go through those. I'm happy to
Absolutely.
address those.
Thank you, Liz. And I appreciate everything that you've done, Liz. I know that you have made giant, giant strides and you had terrible shoes to fill, and I appreciate it. You know, we are moving in the right direction, but the market, the way it is, and the timing, I mean, we can't hold an apartment. We can't hold an apartment. It's just, you know, they're pre-rented. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
No, that's okay. And I totally get it. I think
Yes, you know how to reach me.
Yeah, just a couple of things around. I think if there's an ordinance like this, that we will have to figure out how to cover vacancy, the time holding a unit. I think we'll have to come forward with some money on that. But there's, you know, we are far from, you know, there's a ton of technical things, I think IT wise, that we can do. And I think someone mentioned our portal the other day. Councilmember Kozaczyk told me,
truth.
This couldn't have been the worst timing ever, because that was not related to our program. It was all related to our vendor with an upgrade so that we can do things like where landlords can upload documents and do things like that. And of course, that upgrade crashed. And so, so those are things that unfortunately came at the worst time of the year. I wish it hadn't happened in December at the close of the year. So, you know, I had wanted them to fix it in a day. Of course, nothing can happen in a day when it comes to IT stuff. So, but there's a lot of things we have to put in place, I think, if we want to make this work.
I'm willing to help.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mark?
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just wanted to address kind of going back. I heard actually a lot of good comments and discussions back and forth. I just want to discuss the simplicity of what's being talked about and the fact that it's not a simple issue. Unlike I practice in fair housing. That's what I do. You have race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, and disability is 7 protected on a national level. The difference between those issues and source of income is if you're rejecting somebody because of their race, religion, national origin, those things, they're either in your apartment or they're not in your apartment. You either reject them, you discriminate against them because you don't allow them in, or you do allow them in. That's it. It's a done deal. Whereas the difference is with source of income, it's not just letting them in. It's not just taking the money from Section 8. You're changing the nature of the contract, because in a landlord-tenant relationship, you have a landlord and a tenant. In Section 8, you have landlord, tenant, and the Section 8 program. As Liz mentioned, the contract from Section 8 is a full contract that you basically now have created a triangle. The landlord also has now new obligations, a new contract with the Section 8 program. Liz knows you can, in certain cases, rent can abate. The Section 8 doesn't have to pay if there's issues on the property. That means the landlord gets stuck with that problem. We also don't want to gloss over the fact that this will, as we discussed, affect mom and pops significantly. A lot of those mom and pops don't have the wherewithal to wait 60 days for that first payment. That is a problem. Holding the unit off the market is a problem from them as well. If the market continues going up, I don't even think it'll make a huge difference. You're going to have Section 8 just can't keep up with that. But for the people that will participate, for those levels that can, those things, the mom and pops, these are going to be a huge impediment. So I don't think you can say it's just simple that it's the same as we have all these other protected classes under fair housing, which I fully support across the board. I teach on these things. But it's very different when you change the entire relationship and you make a landlord join another contract that they didn't have to previously. And so you're changing things. And I think a good example of that and showing, if it was just about the money up front, it's like all the rental assistance coming out from the federal government. Landlords will take that rental assistance to pay the rent one time. But when landlords are getting that rental assistance, the ERAP funds, it's a one-time payment. There's no strings attached. With Section 8, there's strings attached. I'm not saying those are bad strings, but those are additional strings that a landlord has to comply with that they don't otherwise have to. So you're changing the nature of operating those businesses.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Shay?
Yeah, as we're getting into the details, it's always the devil's in the details, and I'm concerned about the efficiency, right? I feel like what's fair is that if you're gonna ask, right, the private market to do this, that then the public market needs to move at the same speed, right? Like the two need to be moving at the same speed and have the same expectations. And whenever those expectations are out of sync with each other, that's when the problems are going to occur. So I feel like things like, yes, expecting everything that a landlord would expect, upfront payment, not having to wait 60 days, you know, if those little kinks can be worked out, then maybe there's, you know, a compromise, an agreement. But it seems like it's going to take both parties really massaging this to work through those nuances and details.
Hey, Liz, quick question for you. From a financial perspective, are project-based vouchers different from a cost perspective than floating Section 8 vouchers?
They're
Or are they
different.
roughly the same?
So they operate under the same rules. The only difference is that the project-based voucher is tied to the unit, not to a person. So when a person leaves, the voucher the unit continues to be subsidized.
And can those be swapped? Can you move vouchers from an individual to a unit?
No.
No, okay.
If I understand your question correctly, no, they can't.
Well, you know, if somebody no longer qualifies or they move or whatever for a Section 8 voucher, can that become a project-based voucher?
Yeah, no,
Or does it have
can't.
to stay
No.
within?
So the landlord has a contract, a different kind of contract for project-based vouchers. So if that person now, for whatever reason, wants to move, they take that voucher. They can take a regular voucher with them, and the voucher stays with the unit. So the landlord never loses that.
Okay. Jay?
Yeah, Liz, my question is, under this ordinance, are there any circumstances under which a landlord would be forced to hold a unit off the market while somebody qualified or their unit qualified for Section 8? Would that be, can you perceive that happening under any circumstances?
So the way the program works, there's certain things we have to meet before we can execute a contract.
Sure.
So that has to happen, which in essence, again, person usually by that point is moved in, right, from the inspection, but there could, that time from when they submit their paperwork until the inspection period, again, that can be, let's just say, a week to 2 weeks. So that's the part where I think landlords are saying, I don't want to hold my unit. I can rent it tomorrow.
Well,
So
but the landlord's not actually holding the unit. They're just not receiving the payment.
Right.
The day one, they're receiving the payment on day 14 or day 7. They're not actually not getting paid for the unit being off the market, right?
Not currently.
Right. So I guess my other point here is that if you're a landlord and, you know, again, I don't know how it works for larger landlords, but let's take a mom and pop landlord that has a couple of units. If that unit gets put on the market for $1,500, and that landlord can say, I will rent this unit to the first person that qualifies and hands me a check for $1,500. And if the person that's trying to get the Section 8 voucher used for that unit can't get that money to that landlord before somebody else who doesn't have a voucher gives them the $1,500, then the landlord can still take that market rate person and not take the Section 8 because they're just using whichever funds come to their door first. That's not source of income discrimination. So again, this idea that, you know, units are being held off the market while a landlord is being forced to fill out reams of paperwork, to me doesn't seem to be congruous with what we're talking about and what this ordinance would require. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's correct.
Okay.
From a time perspective, guys, everyone, yeah, it's 7:50. I'm sorry, 5:55. It's 7:55 where I am. So we've got about 5 minutes left in the meeting. Mark, I know you've got some other comments. What I'd like to suggest is maybe you drop us an email, or maybe you and Jay can talk offline. So any final thoughts before we move to the next agenda item? I think this was a great conversation. And I appreciate everyone's input, and Liz and Ann, I appreciate the work you guys are doing. I know that, you know, this is a difficult issue for you. Okay, so with that, we'll move to, so actually, let me just ask, would it be okay if we tabled the next agenda item, which is agenda item number seven, the home down payment assistance to our next meeting? Does anybody have an issue with that?
And thank you, Ray and Leticia, for being here and sitting through this. But we can put that to next month.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was a little bit worried that this was going to be somewhat time consuming. So thank you. Anybody else have a concern with that? Okay. So quickly, Liz and Ann, do you want to give us any other updates for the housing department?
So I just have one update that's pertinent, and that is, fortunately, we have Ernesto Portilla Jr. joining our team starting tomorrow. And I mentioned this, he'll be our public information officer and community engagement specialist. I plan on transitioning some of my commission duties over to him, and I'll be working with him on the transition. I'll still be here, but some of the communications, if you see it coming from Ernesto, who's better known as Neto, if you see an email from him, that's where we'll be in the transition over the next couple months. So I didn't want you to be surprised, and he starts with us tomorrow. So he'll be here next month.
Any luck with the hire of the new position for the development manager?
We had applications closed last night, so we'll be going through the process now and looking forward to getting somebody on board sometime in 2022.
Great. Any other comments or questions for the housing department? Okay, agenda item number 9, next steps. So our next meeting will be on February 3rd. I'd like all the subcommittees to meet before then. We will put the subcommittees on the agenda for an update next month. Does anyone else have any agenda items they'd like to see on our next meeting? The doodle poll that we did for a site walk. The best days based on the results of that doodle poll is going to be January 18th. And the 2 projects we're going to look at are the Newport at Amphi, which is off of Prince and Stone, and then one of Marianne's projects downtown, whose name is escaping me. Marianne, you still on?
Yep, it's Downtown Motor Apartments.
Thank you. Downtown Motor Apartments.
South of Broadway on Stone.
So we'll be sending out an invite to everyone on the commission on January 18th to do those site walks. I would like to, as I mentioned earlier, I would like to get a communication out to mayor and council here in the next month or so, given that we've now been together for a year. And I think maybe another agenda item would be our bylaw creation. Liz, did you have something?
Yes, I forgot on the department update. We are going to have a point in time count, January 26th. We're looking for volunteers to help us with our homeless surveying. It's from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. If you are at all interested, please email. We really are in need of volunteers. So I'm sorry for my delayed thought on that one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anybody else have any thoughts or agenda items for our next meeting? Okay, well, it is 6:01 and we will conclude the meeting. Everybody have a great month.